Now, to continue our examination of this body of learning that we as humans take in, and as I suggest, is the basis of any need for therapy or for emotional problems later in life. I want to look at the aspect of it now which focuses on the net effect of training on parents, on caregivers in our lives. Now, when we're raised in certain ways, when certain lessons have been given, when we take all that information in, and remember, we do not remember it all. It's there. Every aspect of it is in our experience, is in our body, is in our mind, and therefore in our reactive selves. But we do not remember it all. It's most important to remember that aspect of it. Because what I'm about to say could easily be labeled under the title of blame the parents. And I don't mean to make it that. And I don't want to be accused of doing that. I am talking about the responsibility of parents, that aspect of what the message is to younger people as they're coming into life. But I want to point out and emphasize that whatever the caregivers, the parents are doing is fundamental to what the new creatures are learning. Absolutely. But the parents don't know it. They're not aware of it. It's not like they're doing it on purpose, at least most of the time. There are a few cases where it's true they are. But most of the time they're just doing, in other words, what they themselves have learned or not learned. Now, there are several good examples I have of seeing that. For example, a few years ago, I was in a coffee shop with a friend sitting at a table, and at the table nearby, right next to us, there was a small child in a push carriage. Obviously his younger woman, his mother, and an older woman who was clearly the grandmother. And the little boy in the carriage was squawking and making noise in this public place. And every time he would do that, the older woman, the grandmother, would actually address the child in the carriage and say, "You're embarrassing me. Oh, you're abusing me. Oh, you shouldn't be doing that." And I caught wind of the kind of energy that was coming at that child. And at one point, I asked the mother how old the child was, and she told me he was 10 months old. So I have evidence of just exactly how old that little creature was. And as the grandmother kept this kind of thing up, a few minutes had passed, I looked down at that little boy. He looked up at me, and I went like this, all right? And that little boy guffawed out loud. He knew perfectly well what was happening to him, and he knew perfectly well what I meant by giving him the power sign. Now that shows that that grandmother was inflicting something on that boy that he was picking up on. It's the kind of thing that he was learning in the sense that I'm using that word. But she didn't know what she was doing. Was she doing it? Absolutely. Was she doing it out of something that was missing in her? Absolutely. And did she know that she was doing it? Absolutely not. So let me emphasize that. That's how it works. But it points to what I want to highlight in this process of learning from the adult side. In other words, insofar as we are raised with certain lacunae, gaps, absences that we don't get, we will try and get those for the rest of our life, try to procure them. So who knows what that grandmother was doing? What she was saying, because I heard her doing it, was, "You're embarrassing me. Oh, you're making me feel bad. Oh, you're upsetting me." So something about dignity, something about social approval, something about being admired by people around. I don't know exactly. I just heard those words, and that's what she was inflicting on that little boy, because his squawks and his untoward behavior as a 10-month-old was clearly not acceptable to the grandmother in terms of what she needed. Did she know that? No. Was she doing it? Yes, you see. And there's the point. I see that it's so important to understand the multiple aspects of this learning that we do, that there's a very strong implication here that at the very basis of therapy is something which the therapeutic profession has been nervous about, which is there anything that can definitely label as the agenda, as what's wanted, as what's looked for in the therapeutic process? And in other words, thanks to Freud's desire to be respectful, the whole idea was you step back, you do not presume, you do not project, you allow the person who's seeking the therapy to come forward. The assumption was that those drives, having a dynamic, wouldn't necessarily manifest themselves due to the kind of pressures that drives exert. It's not true. It's long since been disproven that we operate that way, or that the drives even operate that way in animals, that are creatures are supposed to be all drive. So that will not come forward. But that means that there is something that is wanted and that we use as a kind of measure when we're doing therapy, and that is a sense of what we want as creatures when we're being nurtured that we don't get, that is a gap, that is an absence that we spend the rest of our life questing for and in all likelihood trying to get from others in our lives. Now, there's all kinds of aspects. In other words, the most obvious place to look for this kind of questing is in love. In other words, when a man and a woman or two people fall in love with each other, the great likelihood is they will attempt to extract what was not given, what was not gotten, quite unawarely, quite unconsciously, but quite really from their partner in the relationship, you see. And I think that understanding that is going to go a long way towards curing the terrible percentage of divorce that justifies what I'm saying here. Better in the United States, more than 50% of marriages end up in divorce. Well, the question is why? These people are rapturously in love. They're definitely, this is it, the partner of a lifetime. The melody's playing, the bluebirds are singing, the ribbon is yellow and gorgeous. And 6 months later, a year later, 6 years later, who cares? It ends in tragedy because the satisfaction of what was missing does not occur. But there are many cases, there are many other cases where that kind of thing is at work. In other words, when someone is obnoxiously dominating in a given management situation, and everything he or she is doing is proving that she has power, that he has intelligence, that they control the situation, that nothing is satisfactory and everything the underlings do can be criticized. And so what's he or she trying to prove? What are they trying to extract for themselves that they did not get? It's there, you see. So the dynamic at work, in my opinion, is that when someone repetitiously quests for something, you must tell me I'm intelligent. You must tell me I'm handsome. You must tell me I have power. You must tell me that I'm kind. You must tell me that I'm lovable. You must tell me that I'm a creative genius, whatever, over and over and over. It cannot be satiated. I love the Latin word satis, means enough. So to be satiated is to get enough of the answer. But I cannot get enough of the answer because my learning as a child was that I would never have that. I was never given that. It was not recognized in me. So this is another aspect of this kind of learning that I'm talking about. This is the adult responsibility in the dialogue. And it's not about blaming in that sense of don't blame. No. There's a responsibility here because the pattern of learning in the adults will reproduce itself in how it deals, first of all, how it deals with other adults, and then how they deal with, above all, with their children. There's a classic instance of this. Two close friends of mine, brilliant people, their parents constantly celebrated their intelligence and praised them for what good grades that they had and so on. And this particular one that I'm thinking of, a client of mine, could not understand why he resented that so much, but he knows he was very angry about it, you see. And as we discussed it, it emerged that every word that his mother, in this particular case, said was not to recognize or validate or affirm or praise this guy was very intelligent, brilliantly imaginative. To recognize that in him was to claim it for herself, was to say essentially that she belonged to him and that all that talent was really hers because that child belonged to her. Now, that's an insatiably hungry mother who doesn't know it, you see. This client that I'm talking about actually has taken up residence in a distant state and has actually arranged his phone so that the message system doesn't work because he doesn't want his mother to call him up and leave him any kind of a message. Well, that makes perfect sense. Now, you see, if you take the standard way of talking about this, how can he be so cruel to his mother? How can he be so horrible to her? And no one is recognizing that, in fact, his mother was predacious, was a predator as far as he was concerned. Same thing happens in the case where, and again, another client of mine announced to his mother that he was engaged, that he'd met a woman and he was planning to marry her. And his mother actually consciously ignored the fact that he had said that and proposed that they take up some other activity that in no way registered that he was engaged. There was no celebration. There was no, the point was, what she was essentially saying was, you can't love any other woman in the world but me. You're going to love me and no other woman. And he wonders why he feels so robbed, so stolen from, so uncelebrated, when he wanted to rejoice in his marriage to be, the marriage to come. But did his mother know she was doing that? No. Did she do it? Absolutely. Same thing with fathers, you see. It's very easy for a man who feels he should be the worker, should be the producer, go out there and do things, to not recognize, to just shrug his emotional shoulders at the talent and creativity, energy, and ability of his sons. He's the only man who's going to do anything, and that kid is not going to be that as good a man. Does the father know he's doing that? No. Is he doing it? Absolutely. And in that sense, the parents, from their absences, are responsible for inflicting further absences on the kids who are in their care. And that's another aspect of this kind of emotional learning that we need to do as creatures. In other words, here I am, a child, day one to age 18, 19, assuming I have that right, and I want to learn how to be a me. But the me that is being instructed at the very least with sizable gaps. You're not going to be that, you're not going to have this, you're not going to do that, you see. Now that is an aspect of this unconscious dialogue which needs to be focused on in therapy, but it's not the only part of it, and so we have more to say. Again, another aspect of the focus on this dimension.